Lori Berenz is a certified Level 3 Ayangar Yoga teacher, director of Yoga Journey in Collingwood, Ontario, and she serves on the board of the Ayangar Yoga Association of Canada. Having been employed in human resources management in the corporate world for 15 years, Lori understands the challenges of balancing family and career and the importance of finding time and space to implement yogic practices into a modern lifestyle. And thank you for taking the time and space today, Lori.
Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. And first of all, want to say thanks to you. And I get a little choked just thinking about how important yoga is, especially during these times, right? And my teacher last night, I want to thank all my teachers because it's such a wonderful thing to have access to this. And you guys have figured out how to do the Zoom and everything. And my teacher last night, she said, that yoga, it's such a lifeline for us during these times. Like, I really don't know how I would have coped without it. So, sorry. Thank you so much. And I'm sorry.
No, I was going to agree as well. I don't know how I would have gotten through all of the turbulence. And, I feel that the community is so important, and knowing that there's other people out there going to the mat and doing whatever they're doing. And some days are really hard, and some days are really easy. And it's just been so uplifting to be able to share in that experience.
And so I'm really interested in talking about the teachings and why we get so emotional and just even thinking about how important yoga is, and especially the Iyengar teachings. But first, I'm interested in knowing about your journey to veganism. How did that happen for you?
Well, when I was 18, I went away to university. So first year university, within a month, I was rooming with a new people I hadn't met. It was off campus, and I was living with a woman who followed the Jain faith, and so they're devout vegetarians. And so I started talking to her one day, and I was really interested, and so she talked to me about vegetarianism and how it was good for the planet. And of course, I always was cognizant of animals and what was going on with the animals. And I never really liked meat and animal products. As a younger person, I wasn't my favorite thing. So it wasn't actually hard for me to give up eating meat, particularly. And then over the years, I gave up, of course, all animal products. But the hardest thing for me, because that was a long time ago, was my friends accepting it, because it was different. And so they would be like, don't you want a Big Mac? Or don't you want to come out to Kentucky Fried Chicken? And I really had no desire. I started by saying, well, maybe I'll only eat for a while, because I didn't really know, like, what is a vegetarian? It was very, kind of a different cultural thing. And then I picked up from like a used bookstore a recipe for a healthy planet. And then I saw more globally how being a vegetarian could affect positively the whole food chain, the environment, and other people and community. And so I actually never looked back. It was hard back in the day. Like, I remember dating someone and going to their house for dinner, and nobody knew what the heck they were doing. But I just kind of persevered. And I guess about maybe more than 10 years ago, through a woman that I had studied with. She was also a fellow yoga teacher of a different lineage, but she was a holistic nutritionalist. And so she was vegan at that time. And so she would do things like invite you into her home and show you how to do cooking and, how to find food sustainably, how to forage. And her name is Carolyn Marie DuPont. She lives in Richmond Hill, Ontario. And she also turned her front yard into a vegetable garden. So she lived this whole holistic lifestyle. And I also did that. So she was a big influencer in terms of, like, really, I think the biggest hump for people from vegetarian to vegan is giving up cheese or dairy. And so it was just like, that was the final straw, and it felt really easy and good. And again, it's just now just like second nature to me. All the cooking that I do is vegan. I've influenced my stepson, and he's influenced his partner, and my other stepson, and my son. And I'm kind of like just showing people they don't always have to rely on animal products for food.
And it's interesting, the intersection with, as you mentioned, like the Jain tradition, and then also yoga. I was vegan first, and then I found yoga, and then I found Ayangar Yoga, and I loved when they talked about the sutras and ahimsa and the yamas and niyamas. And so let's move into talking about yoga then, and because it's so much more than just sort of stretching and exercise, right? It's really, there's much more to it than that.
Yeah, I think, so Iyengar has come right out and said, like, I don't expect you to be a vegetarian if you want to practice yoga. But I think you start where you start, and where you come into a class with a tight hamstring muscle and you start practicing, and then you experience that embodiment. There's something, I think, in it for most practitioners that you walk away and it's so much more than just a physical activity. And then the whole world, the whole ocean of yoga, as I like to call it, is waiting for you. And that is the philosophy and weaving in ahimsa, which is nonviolent, and not taking more than you need, and being content with what you have. And, kind of all of the yamas and yamas that are the ethical ways in which we conduct ourselves as a person and in community start to really become woven in the teachings, especially in Ayangar Yoga. The teachers will often refer to the sutras and talk about where they're at in their own journey. That's kind of the way that I teach. And I think that there's then this desire to want to be a better person, and whatever that may be, and a curiosity. And I think that curiosity and also the awareness is also heightened of, being aware of our actions and how they have other actions resulting from them, and being more considerate about what we do.
Mm-hmm. And so the sutras are kind of like a code of ethics, really, I suppose you could say. And so can you talk about what those are, where they came from?
Sure. So the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, I'm just looking over there, my book. So basically, yoga was an oral tradition, and it was passed on from guru to student, back and forth over the years. And Patanjali is a person or a group of people that is credited with codifying the sutras. And there's only really a reference to, I think, two actual physical poses in the Yoga Sutras. And other than that, it's really aphorisms or threads of what the practice of yoga will bring to you. And it starts out with kind of the ethical principles, and then it moves into the benefits or the boons that you'll get from the practice. And then it moves into what I'm kind of working on right now is in my own practice is Sutra 1 and Sutra 1.3 and 1.4, where it talks about at times the practitioner identifies with the splendor of their own abode. So that we've taken the veils away and we see the true self that lies below the surface. And then 1.4 says, at other times, the practitioner identifies with the vrittis or the fluctuations of the chitta, the consciousness. And so that's the human condition, right? We're tossed and turned between understanding that we are these sentient beings and we have this true self. And then we're also so torn by, what we see in social media or the news, or are we good enough, or all the labels and the forms that we put on ourselves. And so I think the practice of Shavasana gives us the opportunity to really drop those veils and really let go of all the labels and the titles that, whether I'm a mother, wife, student, teacher, female, male, whatever the case may be. And that to me is where we experience that letting go, where we can experience what Patanjali writes about in the sutras of when we practice, we raise our consciousness, our awareness to see beyond, what the worldly expectations are, or the worldly outfit is placed upon us.
And even in sometimes in the asanas, you spoke in class, I think it was last week, about those God moments where you just feel so aligned and so connected with the universe that it's like you don't know where your consciousness ends and the universe begins. That happens even in asana, right?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Those moments that are samadhi, like the eight limb path of yoga, where it was kind of like, oh, what is samadhi? It's like you go off in a puff of smoke and you've reached your enlightenment. But really, what it are those moments where you could be in Tadasana, which is like the first pose, standing in mountain pose with toes together, heels together, and then you have this moment of complete alignment and clarity and the embodiment that occurs. And, we have those moments we can come back to time and time again. And I think the more we practice, the more we have. At the beginning of the practice, it takes us a while to get there, but as we become more devout in our practice, then we experience that more and more and more, and we keep coming back to it.
Yeah, and even if we just go there for the physical, I think when I started it was of physical. I just wanted the physical exercise, but you can't help but have these other experiences, right? And so your doggy is reminding me to ask you about some of the poses that are named after animals. There's quite a few, and
Yes.
I like how in Iyengar teachings that you always incorporate the Sanskrit words as well for the animals and for all the poses.
Yeah, and I think that's where kind of that idea of ahimsa comes into play, that nonviolence, because the yogis, they didn't have Google or Instagram, so they made up the names of their poses, their asanas, based on what they saw around them in nature. And so I don't know what the percentage of poses is. It's generally sages or rishis, wise people, and then animals, and then the shapes of things like triangles and staffs and things like that. So there's, I would probably say at least 50%, if not more, of the poses are made up of animals. And they play very important roles in the practice of yoga, in the story of yoga. Matsyendrasen was a fish that was at the shore and listened to the story of yoga, and he listened and listened, and he was then given the boon of being able to be a yoga master after that. And then Kurma, the tortoise, was the shell in which they churned the oceans. So he had the base, and they had this big stick, and they churned the ocean to release the nectar from the bottom of the ocean. So there's many, many stories about animals. And of course, we start pretty much the first day with downward facing dog, Adho Mukha Svanasana. And so it goes on from there. And I think as yogis, as practitioners, we're encouraged to kind of look at our natural world and see things in a different way, and see that we can learn from those animals and not have to feel like we have to control them and take charge of them, that there is a lesson that they are there to teach us, and maybe that they are our master at times as well.
Right, and I guess we kind of embody some of their qualities when we're taking those poses.
Yes, absolutely. There's Simhasana, which is a lion pose, and that's where you exhale a lot of breath, and you stick your tongue out, and you make your eyes really wide, and so that's the fierceness of the lion. And Kurmasana, you curl in kind of into yourself, into your shell, so that very introverted. So absolutely, yeah, we would take on the personalities of the animal.
Cool. And so Mr. Iyengar also talks about, and I guess this is coming from Patanjali, about the layers of the physical body, so that when we talk about the physical body, it's we can go deeper and deeper and deeper. And it took me, I didn't get that at first, but over the years, I kind of understand that a little bit better. Can you talk about that a bit?
Yeah, so the koshas, the Annamaya kosha and the Pranamaya kosha, and so we go from, Annamaya kosha literally is the layer of food stuff. So it's the layer of skin, and then Pranamaya kosha is the subtle body below that, and then it goes into the mind and the consciousness, and so we get deeper and deeper and deeper. And so I think from a yoga lens, it basically is we have to start at the first layer and develop sensitivity there. And so where the practice can seem fairly physical and, very logical, analytical, where we're like toes in, heels out, align your knees, lift your kneecaps up, contract your quadriceps, all those details really are meant to bring you into this physical space so that you can develop that awareness of going in and going in and going in and going into the layers. And again, I really feel the more you practice, the more you have access with that. So that, in certain poses at a certain stage of your practice, you lie down in Supta Baddha Konasana, and then you can feel the way in which that pose affects your breath. And it's more as though the pose is being done on you rather than you actually doing pose. And so you become almost just like a vessel where the magic happens, where there's that connection with the breath and the mind and the body. And I was in India once, and I remember something that I often refer back to in my own practice, because now there's so much study about yoga and validating, okay, should we actually do inversions when we have our menstruation? Does it really matter? Can you really prove that twisting poses release toxins from the body? And so what Prashant said is that, after a certain point, what the scientists can't discover or, look at in their laboratories is the embodiment that occurs when we practice. So we can say, I'm bringing my kidneys in, and you could look at it scientifically and say, no, that it's not going to do that. That's not how they work. But if we put our mind there and we are in a twist and we bring the kidneys in, who's to argue we haven't brought our kidneys in and we're not squeezing them and, detoxifying in that way? So for me, it's there. The essence is that it's beyond the capability of our kind of medical or scientific brains to understand sometimes. And so the Yoga Sutras help us to kind of understand as much as we can that there's a layer there that's greater than what is man-made.
And certainly we can do things like measure our blood pressure before and after, and we know that our heart rate, and that sort of thing is going to have an effect on that, right?
Totally. And Harvard, I think, has done some really interesting studies with the breath. And I read this fascinating book by James Nestor called Breath. And I was interested in it because I'm really connected to the practice of pranayama within the asana practice, in my own practice and in my teaching. And I really wanted to understand from a scientific standpoint. And really what comes down to is science is understanding that all these ancient ways of breathing had a purpose, and that was 5 regular, quiet, calm inhalations and exhalations completely changed the physiology of the body. And, so we all have that, it's free. And then that is so meshed into the yoga practice that, to me, it's like they really knew what they were talking about all those thousands of years ago.
They didn't have the distractions that we have, right? They had no Netflix or.
they didn't, but yet, they often talk about the vrittis or the fluctuations. So amazingly enough, I often said that the rishis or the seers must have known what we were going to do. And then they created this ideal system for us, because now more than ever, the practice, I think, is so much more relevant.
It really is. It really is. And I think Mr. Iyengar, I've heard I never had the chance to meet him, but I know lots of people who went to India and did meet him. And one of the senior teachers talked about him as being, whereas there was a time when sort of the yoga gurus, that was all they did. They were yoga teachers and they studied and they meditated and that was their world. But Mr. Iyengar was, what was the word she used? He was of the people, like he lived a household life and he had children and a family, but he also was a scientist, right? He devoted his life to studying his own body. And so can we shift now to talk specifically about Ayangar Yoga and who was this man?
Well, they call him the Lion of Pune, but it took him a long time to get there. He came to yoga very sickly. And so I think that always colored his lens of how he wanted to make yoga accessible to everyone. And so if you look at Light on Yoga, which was written in 1966, there's no props there, although Ayangar Yoga really is known for the props. But when he started teaching to Westerners because at the time yoga had fallen out of favor in India and they actually took it out of the schools. So he taught and could see that the Westerners were not really able to practice the poses that he wanted them to be able to do to get predominantly the benefits of the poses. That's why on Light on Yoga, for each pose, he has the effects of what it will do physically, mentally, to the breath, and what the benefits of the practice would be. And so bit by bit, he started to create these props and add that into the practice. And always really, I had the good fortune, I've been to India 6 times to study, and I've had the good fortune of being there 3 times while he was still alive. And he was retired and in the back of the room, and he'd be hanging upside down on the ropes and he'd say, "You ask them to lift their kneecaps, they're not doing it, have them do it again." And so he had this amazing ability to see everything. While Gita and Abby was learning to teach at that time, she was a newer teacher. And so he wasn't a very tall man, but he had this air about him that was just incredible, the energy. And he touched me once on Guru Purnima, where is the day of the Guru. So I think it's in June or July, depending on how it falls in the calendar year. And I happened to be at the Institute, and thousands of people go and line up and receive his blessing. And so you just basically bow your head, and he put his hands on my head. And I walked away and I was like, and I was with my roommate and she was like, "Did you feel that?" And I said, "I thought it was just me." And she's like, "No." And it was honestly like an electrical current that transferred from his fingertips to my head. And I will never forget that. And so he was really, he lived life out in the, the Institute is here and the house is there. And I remember I was standing at the window, we were doing a pose where you extend one leg up and you hold onto the bar and you twist, so Uttita Hasta Vinayastasana. And I just happened to be, my gaze was like right into the Iyengar's home, and he's just sitting in the room reading a newspaper. And that was a very surreal moment for me because I'm like, here's this person. But the first few times I went to Pune, people didn't know about BKS Iyengar. I remember that was back in the day when you had to go to the internet cafe and to email home or whatever. And there's not a lot of, I guess, visitors in Pune at the time. I do believe it's changed a lot because now there's some head offices from international companies that have moved there. But this one young man was like, "Why are you here?" And I said, "Don't you know just across the street?" Because it was at this shopping mall that they built in, and that was a whole other thing. But I said, "Don't you know this man, BKS Iyengar? He was one of Time Magazine's 100 most influential people." "No, never heard of him."
Wow.
And so I think to this day that guy still follows me on Facebook. but it was so weird for me because I just assumed everybody knew. And I think Iyengar said this himself, is yoga got popular in the West, and then the Indians were like, "Oh,
well, maybe we should check it out, because there must be something to that. And so then the popularity came back. But I think one of the biggest things I can see with the Iyengars in general is their generosity. I mean, if you look at Guruji's work in developing the props, I think I heard that at one point someone said, those blocks and bolsters and stuff, you should patent those because they're unique to your system. And he said, no, let everyone have it. And he always said yoga is yoga. I don't really want to call it Ayangar Yoga, but these people, I guess the Westerners, wanted to have a label for it. And so he never really said, I did this and I did that. And even the rope system, which is unique to our system, he basically said, yeah, I found an ancient picture and the yogi was hanging upside down from vines in a tree. And so I just recreated it. So he's never really said, I did this and then I did that. And basically all the work that they did out there, Gita Iyengar as well, his daughter, for women in yoga and the practice of yoga, particularly, I would say that most of what we see in modern Hatha yoga has been somewhat influenced by that. And he truly was someone who didn't have that affliction of needing to hold on to things. He truly, to me, represented a human being that even at the end of his life, he had made peace with it and he was ready to let that go. And he probably had teachers and things over the years that he was fond of that went on and followed a different lineage or created their own style. And he seemed to treat people equally without, holding on to ego or, whatever we tend to get wrapped up in. And one of my favorite memories of India while he was still alive was going down into the library in the bottom of the building. And if you could stand the mosquito bites, and that was pretty significant, you could sit, and he had amassed these books of thousands of books of yoga studies of all lineages, not, just Ayangar Yoga, all lineages. People had donated books. There was all kinds of information there. And he would just sit at the desk and write his correspondence, handwritten letters, and he had a secretary. And sometimes he would give them notes and things like that. So you just got to see this kind of superhuman person doing everyday things and not making a big deal out of it. So.
Wow. Yeah, when I started practicing yoga, I've always had this kind of guru aversion, just the idea that I'm supposed to worship somebody. I never wanted to get into that, and I said to myself, I'm never going to follow a particular strain of yoga. I'm just going to try all of it, and I'm going to embrace it. But I'll tell you, like so many, right? We find the Iyengar school, and and then I had a bike crash. So first of all, I felt like this is home, and then I had a bike crash, and my teachers were so great about making sure that my injuries were taken care of. I was able to use the props that Mr. Iyengar developed to help our bodies during these times. And a friend of mine is a teacher in Amsterdam, and he has had a similar attitude towards just this, I think, just towards the idea of worshiping a guru. He said, I'm going to go to India and I'm just going to see Mr. Iyengar. It's no big deal. But he said as soon as he walked into the room, and Mr. Iyengar, as you said, he has this presence, and he's just this guy that has done so much for all of us. And as you say, so selflessly. So, yeah, I'm very emotional today. We're going through a lot with COVID right now, and it's just coming up. And honestly, I never had any idea that yoga would be such an important part of my life. And this person and his family. So you've mentioned his daughter Gita. She was also very influential, especially for women. And I think it's a gem for women is her work. Yeah. The book.
Yeah. She wrote Gem for Women, and I think it was written in 1990. Again, I have my copy over there, but I would be so bold to say that most of what you see in women's yoga of different lineages out there, the seeds were planted by her work. And she really was an advocate for women practicing yoga. And I was in class once when she was saying, predominantly to the Indian students that were there, you know, for 1 hour, at least, you know, a couple times a week, forget about the family, forget about the kids, the cooking, just do this for yourself. And so, and that, I mean, for us doesn't sound a lot, but in the Indian subcontinent, that is huge. And I really feel, I saw her in action in the medical classes looking after not just women, but women who had all kinds of gynecological issues, as well as issues, musculoskeletal issues. And she really poured herself into that in a way that you don't, so selflessly, that you don't see in the average person. And she would be harsh with us at times, but it was because I think she cared so much, and she could see, you know, what she wanted us to do to get better, but would we just listen? You know, would we be able to put our ego to the side, and would we be able to just follow her instructions? And so my last memory of her was in June of 2018. I went, and that was before she passed, and the first day, you never really knew near the end if she was going to be teaching when you went to the Institute. But they had us all start in Shavasana, and I was like, kind of opened up my eye, and I was like, it's Gita. And I got very emotional because I, even if it was just the one class that she taught, it would have been a gift. And even lying in Shavasana, that day was a pranayama class, she could see, I have scoliosis, so she could see the left side and the right side of my body are quite different from one another. And so she taught to me, to the rest of the crowd, through me that day. And then the following day we did standing poses. And again, she, very minute movements. Okay, move your left toe in, and you kind of hold your breath, because when Gita calls you on stage, you're like, okay, you better listen and be focused. And so, but it was such a gift. And still, you know, when I'm practicing, I still try to think about, okay, what did she say? What did she say I should do with this part of my foot? And I went to a person, a colleague after, and I said, I'm really sorry that I was up there for like 20 minutes or felt like forever. And she said, no, it was like she was teaching us through you. And she really had that power. So while I was there, still everybody felt like they were uniquely being tapped into by her wisdom. And I feel like now our future is very bright. I feel the lineage will be carried on very well by Abhijata. I like that there's a strong female presence, and they've allowed her to have her own personality in all of this, which is huge, to carry on the tradition. And I just feel that it's a great opportunity, especially for younger students and or students brand new to Ayangar Yoga, to come in and experience the tradition and the depth of the lineage through these new modern eyes.
And Abhijata is Mr. Iyengar's granddaughter.
Yes.
And then there's also Prashant, his son, is still involved, right? With the
Yes, he's still teaching very regularly. He has through this whole time created a YouTube channel, and it's called Ayangar Yoga Official, I believe. And he does a weekly talk on the sutras. He'll pick up the sutras and go through the sutras one by one with his nephew, who is, I believe, a Sanskrit scholar, or if not very knowledgeable in Sanskrit. And so he has taken that all online to support us that want to learn from a distance. And so it's a beautiful mix of tradition and modern technology. And I think that's one thing that all of us in this tradition can really embraced during this time when we've had to pivot so many times and change, and can we teach authentically online? Is it a thing? I believe that Iyengar really was a Renaissance man, and he would have adapted, and the way in which Abhijata and Prashant have adapted, and the other teachers also from the Institute have adapted to share and continue to share. It's almost as though we have a new opportunity around the corner that we don't know what it all looks like at this point, but for those of us that really miss going to India, it's a great opportunity to continue studying with them in that way.
Yeah, it was last year when Abhi did a Zoom session that I was able to participate in, and again, it was just this, tears of joy because I could never go to India, but here she was in my apartment. it's kind of cool in a way, and it's amazing how the lineage is being upheld, and all of the teachers. I know you guys go through rigorous teacher training. I really appreciate that the classes, you guys, you watch over us. Sometimes teachers will practice along with us, but if it's particularly a new pose or a challenging pose, and I love the way you demo the pose, and then you come up to the screen and you observe us and give us these instructions. And it sounds kind of niggly. At first I thought, oh, what difference does it make if I move my toe in that much? But it really does. It's this alignment, and almost this an energetic alignment as well that happens when we really get the pose all lined up. So in speaking about the family and the legacy and the teacher training, a couple of things I'd like to make sure we touch on before we go. And one is the Beller Yoga Trust. So I know that Mr. Iyengar, as you mentioned, he never felt the need to patent. Like, it's not his yoga. He's channeling, I think, the Patanjali and sharing all of the wisdom that was brought to him. And he also donated a lot of his, or I don't know, a portion of the sale of his books to the Beller Yoga Trust, because he was born into poverty. And I know some teachers who went to his 90th birthday party. I don't know if you went, and they had a tour of this village and the school and stuff. Are you familiar with all that?
I didn't go to that particular event, but I'm definitely knowledgeable about Beller, and so they've actually, some of the online events have been fundraisers for Beller. So the funds of the online events have been, and I think in some cases too, the online events have really helped the associations, because our biggest costs are getting people certified because it takes so long. And in Canada, for example, we would have to, I did assessments in Victoria, because as you kind of go up the levels, you need students that can practice what you're going to teach them. And so there's only a few parts in Canada where you have that level of student. So we have something called a certification mark, which is basically our patent that we are certified Ayangar Yoga teachers, and we pay into that. It's not a huge amount of money. It's $50 every year, but all of the associations across the world would have that. And 50% of those proceeds go directly to Beller. So in addition to special events and workshops and books and things like that, so that is a general revenue that's coming in and going recirculated into Beller. And from what I understand, because Iyengar, so the B stands for Beller, that's in his name, and he worked tirelessly to get yoga in the schools there. And then that had a ripple effect on the rest of India. And so the Prime Minister had acknowledged him, I think, posthumously, that he was influential in getting yoga back into the schools. Because when there was that International Yoga Day, there was a bit of a push in the Iyengar community to see if we could have that on December 14th, which is BKS Iyengar's birthday. But it's now June 21st. But in line with all of that, he got a special award from the Indian government. But back to Vellore, yes, he's created, from what I understand, hospitals. It was a town of poverty where starvation wasn't unusual. And he basically said it was the soil that gave birth to me that I wanted to give back to. And so, in some cases, I think our modern selves would go, well, like I was sick there and I had nothing and nothing to eat. My family was poor. I'm going to leave that place and never go back. But he felt like that was something he wanted to put his energy into. And it's beautiful to see that work is continuing even after he's passed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so you mentioned that there are these associations the world over. So that's one of the beauties of the Iyengar teachings, is that you can go anywhere in the world if ever that's possible again, and to take an Iyengar class, and even in a different language, you could probably just join in and know.
Totally.
Because they're speaking a lot of the Sanskrit, and so as a teacher at the same time, you guys all are able to bring your personalities to the classes, and honestly, in 20 years of practice, I don't think I've ever been to a class that's identical to a different class. There's always some difference in sequencing or some different new way to use the props. It's amazing the ways you guys come up with to use ropes and belts and props. And so, can you speak to that? Like when you're going through the teacher training, I guess there's a foundation that you're taught, but then you're also encouraged to kind of do your own thing with it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I am quite a free spirit, and I sometimes think about this practice as from the outside lens, it's seen as very alignment-based and strict and adherent to this and that. But when I first started teacher training, I wasn't interested in teaching. I was working in an office, and I just really wanted to learn because I was just my first class, I was like, what is this? I've got to learn more. And so I struggled, I think, with what do I have to be like to be an Ayangar yoga teacher? And I think for a while, it was kind of the belief that you had to behave a certain way to go for assessment, prepare for assessment, etc. And so there's a lot of pressure around that. But after a while, you kind of start to find your own voice and your own way, and you are encouraged. You're encouraged to teach. You're encouraged to share what you learn. Even if you teach your family while you're in teacher training, and you just, or your friends, or you try to work that way. Like I ended up teaching at lunch hours, a group of people in a software company that I worked for. And so I feel like it takes a long time to find your stride, but then when you do, you see really that instead of this rigid structure, there's again, like I refer to it as the ocean of Ayangar Yoga. And that's, I think, where the endless creativity comes from, because he says he also is an artist. And so I think we're the length of time that we're in teacher training, and then the depth of the teacher training gives us this ability to be very creative, to see how our teachers respond to things. If we're fortunate enough to go to India, we see how they respond to things. And then it just kind of ignites a different part of your brain that you might not necessarily be able to use. And so to me, the discipline is there, but discipline is not a bad word. It's not meaning like you have to follow this guru and this pattern and this, that. Because, Iyengar didn't expect you to bow down at his feet, whether you walked by or not. Like he just would, it was an indifference really that was even an equal. And so for me, it's that you have this huge pool or ocean to draw from. And that's where the creativity comes. But I think it takes a while for us to find our own stride and our own voice. And that only comes through our own practice. The one thing I think that is a hallmark of Ayangar Yoga is that we are first practitioners, first students. When I started teaching, I sat back and I thought, well, I've just ruined the absolutely most perfect thing in my life by becoming a teacher or trying to become a teacher. And I sat back and I thought, I don't want to do this because it changes everything. Am I practicing for myself? Am I practicing for my students? And then I was like, no, I'm a student. I'm just like sharing my journey, hence the name Yoga Journey. I'm just sharing my journey, on this whole thing, because I felt very grateful and privileged to have had the opportunity to study in India and study with my teachers and be able to devote myself. And eventually I left my career and all of that. But yeah, I think that we all are then really encouraged now to become our own people. There was I think back in the 70s, maybe there was a wave of people that tried to emulate BKS Iyengar, but everything was so new. I think they were trying to just do whatever they could to understand, because here's this person that comes in and is teaching them this thing that they've never learned before. So how do you do it? You do it by kind of imitation. But now what I love about the whole training program is it's more of a mentorship. And so, where and Abhi Jatta has said many times, where there's friendliness, there's a sense of community, where you help these people, you guide them and you give them information from your experience. And I think that's really beautiful.
It is, yeah, and it's certainly one of the things that I'm so grateful for. Again, I can't express how much this yoga journey has meant, and especially in these times. So you've had to shut down your studio, I guess, in Collingwood, but you're doing online teaching, which is really great. And is that just going to continue into the foreseeable future, I guess?
Yeah, I really feel like, I've struggled with it personally. I have, paid rent on a place for over a year that I could only use for 4 months of that year. And does it make sense to have a physical space? And I think there are days where it feels harder than others, but I think it's more just the pandemic than it is actually the thought of teaching online, because I actually feel very energized and excited about teaching, and afterwards I feel that afterglow. So I feel very fortunate that I will be able to keep my space for at least another, who knows how long. But teaching online, I think, is a reality now. And I moved from Markham, Ontario to Collingwood about 6 years ago. And I had a group of students that they were phenomenal students that started from scratch with me when I was a fairly new teacher. They were with me for, I think in some cases, like 10 years. And they were, when I was leaving, they were saying, oh, could you do a YouTube channel, or could you, because back then Zoom wasn't a thing. And I was like, no, not really. That's not my thing. I'm not like a camera person. No. And now it's funny because a lot of them have joined, refound me. And so I think that's really beautiful that they wanted to, because when I left, there's not a lot of Ayangar Yoga teachers. And so they were like, well, who do we go to? Because they didn't want to travel for half an hour, every time they took a class. And I said, well, kind of limited, but, so I think, and I'm looking at ways right now of how to run the studio and the online piece at the same time. I'm challenged because there's only one of me, and it feels like I've been very busy for a long time. And but I am looking at rolling out a yoga immersion program with another Ayangar Yoga teacher. And so I'm very excited about that, and that will be an online offering. And I feel like it's more of a blessing than a curse now. And but in the early days, I was like overwhelmed. And when I think about how stressed out I was, honestly, I laugh at it now, but I was really stressed out.
Yeah, well, you've done great things, and I'm really glad that I get to study with you. So, there's that. And I guess it must be kind of hard for you guys, because I remember, lots of years of classes, and it was always about the teacher. Like, there's nowhere to hide in an Iyengar class because the teacher's walking around and making adjustments and helping us make sure we get the poses right. And I've never had a yoga-related injury in an Iyengar class. That's for sure. That just doesn't happen. And in fact, yoga has helped me cure various ailments that have come up through my life. So, is there anything else, Lori, that you want to say as we go? People can find you at yogajourney.ca. Are you taking new students? Do you take brand new students?
I definitely do. So what I like to do is reach out to them and just have a conversation with them either before or after they take a class. And I like to have a relationship with the student. I like to make sure that whatever I'm doing, I'm taking them into consideration and being able to serve them. And I have a lot of regular students, but I have new ones that pop in and want to try Ayangar Yoga. Right now I'm theming all my classes like yoga for healthy knees or yoga for healthy backs or lateral extensions or backwards extensions. Just for me, it's kind of a creative outlet, but I teach only one advanced class online. The rest are all levels. So I'm happy to modify wherever students are at. And I feel I didn't put a lot of attention into kind of building my online component, but I think that is a reality. And I actually feel like when I can get back into studio, there will be certain classes that I'll continue to teach online at the same time. And I think that it's a great opportunity. And what I love about some of the online things is that students are in their own space. There isn't a sense of competition. They can be honest. Their ego can be put a little bit on the shelf. They don't have to feel like they have to overdo everything. If they're a little bit tired, you can give them an option to, perhaps not do this pose or that pose, or do this one instead. And so I think there's some more ownership. And I think the really dedicated students have kind of rose to the surface, which makes our job as teachers easier. Because the ones that we're doing it maybe for social reasons or whatever reasons, and I'm not, there's all kinds of reasons why someone can come to a yoga class, and they're all valid and they're all good. But I think the real dedicated practitioners have been the ones that have stuck with the practice and showed up. And so it's a joy to just share. To me, it's like just sharing what I'm working on at that time.
That's wonderful. Okay, and I just have one more question. Who are your teachers? You are a student as well, right? So you have senior teachers that you go to?
I do, yes. So I studied with Mayar Roz for 15 years. And then I studied with Marlene Mawini in Toronto for probably 7. And now I look a lot towards Louis Etling and some of the other senior teachers in Canada. I admire them all. Krishna, Ty, Anne, Leslie, they're all wonderful teachers. You're very fortunate in Victoria. You have a wealth of amazing teachers and students as well. And I really also get a lot of feedback, support, and learning from my colleagues, from my peers. So people that are directly at the same level or on the same kind of path as me. One stage we were in India, and Abhi Jasper really encouraged us to develop these communities within our community where peers get together and learn and share and practice. And so in a lot of ways, that's my teacher right now, because we're stuck in a different, time zone, warp speed, whatever, Groundhog Day, whatever you want to call it. And so it's, messaging different people back and forth and saying, hey, what's your interpretation of this form of pranayama? Or, if someone has this issue, what would you recommend? And so that to me is really the community is really my teacher.
We're lucky to have this wonderful community for sure. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Lori, for taking the time today.
Thank you.